Hey everyone, it's your average chess player here. Today we are going to look at this endgame position. It is white's turn to play and white has to try and find the best move and a winning continuation here. So as usual, if you want just the solution to this position, skip ahead to the solution part of the video. I'll leave timestamps in the description. You could always pause the video here, try to find the solution, skip ahead, verify your solution. Feel free to stick around to see how I solve this position, nuances that I noticed, mistakes that I did in my calculations, and how I stumbled upon the final solution. So let's get started. So in this position today, this is a slightly a tricky one because there is no opposition that we need to fight for, but white has this pawn that he can queen, so does black. Although we are one step away from move away from capturing this pawn, black can also do the same thing with king g3, takes on f3, moves the king away, and then queens this pawn, while we also can try to queen this pawn. As soon as black steps into h3 or g3, we can start queening our pawn because g5 would no longer be controlled by black. So these are the details that we need to look at. As white, our plan is to try to queen our pawn and win the game because we do have connected pass pawns, which is good. What are our candidate moves? That's the next thing. G5 is out of the question because you're gonna just take, black is just gonna take the pawn, so we wouldn't want to play that. Which leaves us with our king. A6, b6, and c6 are out of question because this pawn will start queening if you move to one of these squares and you can't catch up. Which leaves us with king a5, king a4, king c4, and king c5. B4 is taken away by the pawn. So we have four candidate moves. C5 and c4. It just looks like it might be we might have the same set of variations in both cases. So I'm just gonna look at c4 instead. So c4, a4, and king a5. So the first move that I considered after doing all this is just playing king a5 just to see what happens. And I did want black to play king g3 here, just to know how this variation plays out. So after g5, because white is now free to queen this pawn, king f3, g6. Here black has to play king e2 and not king g2, because if you play king g2, I will queen first and it'll be a check. So we don't want that. So king e2 is just a safe move, and I would prefer king e2 instead of e3 because I control all the squares that the pawn is going to queen on. If I played king e3, I wouldn't have access to f1, which doesn't sound right. So king e2 because we're going to queen this. After g7, f3, queens, and f2. This position, although white has a queen on the board, is a draw. This is a theoretical draw. So if the black pawn is on the bishop's file or the rook's file or the central file, like each even the knight's file, so each position of this pawn has a different technique that white has to employ to win, but all of them kind of depend on where your king is. So in this case, the king is really far away. If the king was any closer, this position would be winning for white because he has a queen. But in this case, the king is too far away that this position is a draw. And I'll show you a sample variation just for fun, to show you how this is actually a draw, which is king f1. Let's give a check. So the pawn is blocked. I can bring the king closer. The closer I think as soon as I reach c3, I could win this endgame as white. But we won't have the time. King g1, black is threatening to queen. Queen g4 check. King h1. Like if you play king f1, you're blocking your pawn. Then king c3 is possible. So we don't want that. So we play king h1, queen f3 check, king g1, and again like black is still threatening to queen. So queen g3 check. And here you would think like black would black's only move is here king f1, but there's a twist. King h1. because if you take the pawn on f2, it's a stalemate. It's crazy, and black is still threatening the queen, and you can't move your king forward because you're gonna queen, and queen's on the board. Again, that's a theoretical draw. So queen f2, and this is the position that would come up. Remember this position, because in this exact setup, if black had a move, like it's a stalemate, but if black had an additional piece here or a pawn, and black was forced to move that, we could actually win this endgame, hypothetically, right? So remember that. We'll go all the way back to the starting position. So king to a5, king takes a5 is no good. We're just gonna check king c4 before we move on to a4, because now, since we want that additional pawn or a piece on the board, we're gonna try and see if we can leave this pawn alive in the game. So after king to c4, if black plays king g3, then this makes for a much easier endgame, because g5 takes, and here if we do the same sequence of moves all the way here, and I give it a check, I do this, I play king d3 here, check. If we do the whole set of moves that we did earlier, this is winning for us, right? I could just play this and checkmate. This is working. This is completely working. So we know that we need to leave the pawn alive. It's just that in this specific variation, black is not forced to play all the way here to king g. It's not forced to play king g3. Black can play a4, threatening to queen its own pawn. And if I try to come closer this way to protect this pawn, and maybe even like come in this way if I want to, it's gonna play a3 and threaten to queen this pawn. I come here, and then I have to like take this pawn because it's queening, and now we can play king g3, and we run into the same endgame that we saw earlier with the stalemate trick that is there in the position. So now we already know king c4 doesn't work. King a5, we saw the checkmate pattern, which leaves us with king a4, and this is completely winning for white. And the reason is whatever we saw with the king c4 and king g3 variation, it's the same thing, but it actually works this time without any tricks from black, and black cannot move the pawn, so he is forced to move the king. So there is just two moves here. King h3, I don't understand why you would play that, because you're losing a tempo, and I would queen even earlier with the pawn on the like the pawn would be on f3 when I queen, and I can move the queen. So it's not, you're like one tempo slow. So king g3 and g5 are the moves. We'll look at g3 first, because that's the variation we have been looking at. So g5 takes here, and we already know how this is gonna end, right? After f2, I can play the same set of moves. I can play queen g2. I can prevent the pawn from moving, but for the sake of simplicity, we're gonna look at the same set of moves that we saw earlier. So king b3, and black can threaten with like king g1, but then queen g4 check. Let's say king, even if you play king h1 and try to queen this, queen f3 here, this, and I take. But it's not a stalemate, because there's this pawn. And the thing is, I don't have to take this pawn. Like, I cannot take this pawn because it's a stalemate. But I can just play something like king c3. You push. I can even play king d3. And you push again, and I just simply take. And that's it. And this is a winning endgame. This is a simple checkmate with the queen and a few moves. Just keep moving the king and checkmate. It's what a variation, right? Like there's just one. You just leave a pawn on the board and you nullify the stalemate trick, and you are winning the endgame. Let's go back. We just have to see what happens with king g5. That is also important. King g5 has the same drawback as king h3, because in both cases, like king h3, at least like you still have to play g5, but with king g5, black is away, like even further away from this pawn. In fact, in this case, you can even take the pawn here, and that might be the only way to win this. You take this pawn. If you go back, I'm ahead with my king. Like now I have that king. I can move. I have access to c3. So if you remember that position we saw earlier where the pawn was queening and we checkmated the king or with queen d2. That is possible in this position, and we know that already. And if you try to make like moves like this, king f6, and now like we have to find opposition, so we can just play king b6, odd number of squares in between the two kings, and it's black's turn to play, so we have the opposition. We could also play king b4. All the four corners are the same color, and it is black's turn to play, so we have the opposition. You could do it any number of ways to get the opposition here, and just black is gonna try and like stick around, you could say, to this pawn now, but you run out of squares eventually. Then I take this pawn, and then I have two connected passed pawns, and I just win. I can just win this endgame. Queen one of them, checkmate. That's it. What an endgame! It's a simple one. You just have to know what is the trick in the position the black has, and then you realize, hey, I just need to make black make a move in this position. So if you skipped ahead to this part of the video, we're just going to look at the solution. The winning move for white is the move king a4, keeping this pawn alive. And if black plays king g3, g5 takes, king e2, g6, f3, queens f2. Looks like black is one step away from queening, but then you swoop in with your king, with your queen, and then like if king f1, let's say king b3, and then like you could play king g1 threatening the queen, queen g4 check, king h1, queen f3 check threatening to take this pawn, king g1, queen g3, and black can play king h1 saying, hey, if you take on f2, it is a stalemate, but in this position this pawn is alive, so it's not a stalemate. So after a4 check, king c3, a3, king d3, a2, just queen takes a2, and this is an elementary checkmate in a few moves. You just move your king and checkmate somewhere along this rank, and that's it. I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you liked it, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.